everyone, and welcome back to the channel and to another video. Now this one is going to be not build, it's just going to be some information about how I design in Disney Dreamlight Valley. I've had some people ask me what kind of steps I take or what I think about before I make the designs, and I wanted to do a video of just kind of my top 10 tips of how I design in Disney Dreamlight Valley. Now I do want to preface this video by saying by no means am I an expert. I don't know the perfect way to do things. I personally just do this as my kind of natural way of doing it. I've played previous games in the past with a lot of designing, like I grew up on The Sims. I'm used to designing things. I'm very creative in that sense, and I enjoy building things and designing things and getting them to how I want them to look. But this by no means is a rule book. You can do this any way you want to do it. Let your creativity just go free. Design things how you want to design. There is no rule book in this game. There are so many things you can do in Disney Dreamlight Valley to decorate, so definitely make it your own. But these are just my top 10 tips of how I personally design in the game. So tip number 1 is to kind of come up with themes that you're interested in or that kind of suit the aesthetic you're going for. So for example, a lot of the biomes in my valley go by kind of different themes. I do have a very like cottagecore kind of vibe up in my forest, whereas in my Forgotten Lands I've gone for kind of a more dark ruined look. In my plateau I've gone for a very overgrown jungle theme. So I kind of want to change it up in the different biomes. It allows me to explore different design types and ways of designing. So like my plaza now is kind of a city vibe. I feel like it'll probably stay like this for a long time because I love having this kind of built up area that you first come into when you come into the valley, and then you kind of explore out, and as you explore out to the other biomes it becomes slightly more natural and more overgrown. Now, you don't have to fit a certain theme in your biomes at all. You can build to your heart's content, and you don't have to go by a certain theme in the slightest. You want to decorate to something you love and you love the look of, so don't feel constrained by themes or fitting a certain aesthetic type. Let it be your own creation, but sometimes a theme can help you envision what works for you, what you're interested in, what you want a biome to look like, and does make it easier when you're looking at what houses to include, what items to purchase or craft, as well as what kind of layout you want to do with the biome. Tip number 2 is to kind of decide which houses or bigger buildings are going to go in each biome before you start decorating it. I always find this a really good way to kind of map out the layout and figure out where these big houses or big buildings are going to go, because they take up so much space, and if you don't really know the location of where they're going to go in the biome, it is very difficult to kind of start your decorating around that, to map in your pathways or your trees or anything else. So I find it a really good way to kind of start off the build is by placing in the houses I want to use. Now with the houses in the game or the buildings in the game, there is no rule book of which houses go in which biome. If you want to put Jack's house in the plaza, go for it. If you want to put Simba and Nala's kind of King's Rock kind of big sunlit plateau themed house, you want to put that in your meadow, go for it, because you can design around that to how you want it to look. There is no rule book in the game of where things can go. I just personally find it easier to figure out which houses are going to go where they make the most sense to me personally, and then design around those. Tip number 3 is to kind of look at what craftables you can make with the resources you have, as well as see what Scrooge items you have access to before you start building. I always find this a really good tip because it means you kind of know where your limitations are, know what you can use. Obviously, a lot of people do see other people's builds or other people's photos of their valley, and they kind of want to recreate that bit in their own way, but they look at it and they think, I don't have half this stuff from Scrooge's store, or I don't have these premium items, or I can't craft these things because of resources. So it's good to kind of look in advance and be able to think, what resources do I need to make these craftables I want to use, especially the bigger craftables. Say for example you wanted to include the Mickey water tower, which I currently have in my meadow. It takes a lot of resources to craft. It's very time consuming. It took me a long time to even make it, but you can look at that in advance and decide, right, this is what I'm going to grind towards, this is what I'm going to make, because I know I want to include it in my build in this certain place. It just takes some time. When it comes to Scrooge shop, obviously it does just take time to get used to kind of going in the shop every day, hoping you'll pick up something you want. There are a lot of Discord servers out there where you can go in and see other people's Scrooge shop with the multiplayer function. You can visit them and buy those items and kind of start obtaining the things you want to obtain. That has been a massive benefit to me. I'm completely done with my character collections now, apart from obviously some premium and star path stuff I can't get anymore. But for the most part, I'm completely done. I'm kind of just down to the modern furniture, which does really massively benefit me in my builds. I do feel for those who are newer to the game, who don't have these Scrooge items or Star Path items or anything like that. However, there is always alternatives. There is other ways to design things without having those items. It is something you can chop and change. There's a lot of premium or Star Path items I wish I could use in builds, but I just alternate them for something similar or gives off the same kind of vibe. So it is doable, but just try and work on getting those resources up by making kind of a storage room of all your resources, building those craftable items, and checking Scrooges every day to try and get hold of everything you want. Tip number 4, if you are someone who wants to do an overgrown biome, which I tend to love doing, majority of my biomes are overgrown, make sure your foliage in those biomes is accessible. So when I'm doing builds in certain biomes, I always mention how there's certain foliage you can use that you can just run across, and this allows for things to be accessible in the biome that you do need to access for resources or for quest lines, things like that. So for example, a really good one is the ferns you can get if you're making this very overgrown area with lots of bushes and trees. Having a fern just kind of slot in the middle of those in front of a rock spot or in front of a pond means you always have access to those areas without having to lose that overgrown look of the biome. And there are other plants and things like that that you can run over, so it's always good to test that out, see how that works, and if you are trying to go for that overgrown look, you can still achieve that but also make the biome accessible day to day. Tip number 5 is lighting. Lighting is so important when I'm doing my builds. I like to make sure that the lighting in each biome fits as though it is actually accessible and you would be able to walk around and still see everything and be able to do everything. I do tend to change the time in my game very often, so I usually only ever play during the day or the sunset because I just prefer it that way. But if you are someone who wants to kind of leave the time or take photos or do anything during when it's at that darker time at night, then lighting is very important. Lighting is also really good to bring an atmosphere. So say for example you're doing a very kind of cozy area, it's nice to include a lot of warm yellow lights. And if you're doing kind of a whimsical fairy inspired area, having lights kind of be dotted about between bushes and trees really does bring through that kind of whimsical vibe, as if there's kind of fairies in between there or something like that. So definitely use lighting as a way to get really creative. You can also make things with lighting that are really cool, like you can make the different craftable lampposts in all the different colours and make like a rainbow wall. There's so much you can do with lighting. It's such a good thing to have in the game, so make sure you are utilising that in your builds. Tip number 6 is character theming. So I always tend to let my kind of builds speak for themselves. I don't like to do too much theming around each house just because I feel like it can get quite overwhelming with a lot of different colour and a lot of different themes going on. But I always like to pay homage to whichever kind of building it is. So say for example outside Merlin's house, I have a telescope to pay homage to him. Outside the Frozen castle, I have the Frozen Anna statue that we got with Elsa. I always like to pay homage to those characters so you know who is living there. Obviously, if you are someone who wants to do big character theming outside each house, it is a perfect thing to do. It always looks really, really great to kind of utilise the items you have from both friendship quest lines as well as anything from Scrooges, and build something that you feel like that character would really enjoy. It will help you build up those biomes and make it feel really natural. Tip number 7 is if you are doing any building, make sure you're leaving spots for the natural spawns of the biome. Now, don't get me wrong, having oregano and basil constantly pop up in my plaza and my meadow drives me insane because I don't need any more of them. I've got a big storage of all that stuff. They do just drive me mad. However, it is very important to leave those spawn points up. It means that you will get those spawns come through. Obviously, some are more important than others. Like, for example, I would rather leave a spawn point for something that's a bit more rare, especially the things in Eternity Isle I find I need a lot more often and I don't have as much stock of. but it is important to kind of leave those spawns up. A really good tip of what I'll do is when all the flowers grow, don't pick them up if you don't need them. Just leave them and move them to somewhere that just looks a bit better, or you'd rather they had spawned because it just fits the look, and leave them. They won't spawn anymore, they will just stay there, and it is a great way to make sure you haven't got a bunch of different herbs and things popping up constantly in the biome. Tip number 8 is to make sure you're walking through your biomes as you are decorating. Now with builds and biome builds, I find it really helpful to kind of stop when I've done a certain section and to just walk through it and make sure everything's accessible, make sure everything fits right, make sure the kind of look of what I was going for is working. I find this really good because sometimes in the furniture mode camera view, it's hard to get a real feel of, is this accessible and is this kind of layout working? Is everything got enough space that you can kind of get around everything? Is there enough room to fit in everything I want to fit in? So walking through it is a really good way to kind of just get a look, especially with the multiplayer feature. If you do have friends or people you know who play the game, invite them over, get them to walk around the build, and they can tell you, oh, maybe change this a little bit, or maybe can you move this little section slightly because it's a bit like difficult to get through, I keep getting stuck on things, or can you kind of change up the lighting here because I can't really see. It's always good to just test what things work and what things don't, and if you have others to help you with that, then that's great, and if not, there is always communities of people on Discord or on YouTube that can support you with your builds. Number 9 is photo opportunity spots. Now this obviously isn't mandatory, this is personal preference, but if you are someone like me who participates in Dream Snaps every single week, I like to include spots in my valley that are really good for photo opportunities. Obviously with Dream Snaps we do tend to just build this whole set for whatever we're making most of the time, at least I do, and this kind of doesn't really help, but there are some cases where I've taken Dream Snaps in my complete builds in biomes and I haven't had to change anything because it fits perfectly with whatever the theme is. So there's a lot of people who've got these beautiful theme parks, and when it comes to doing a theme park submission, they didn't have to change much. They added a couple things, they tweaked a couple things, they grabbed some characters, and they were done. So it is good to kind of provide opportunities for photos as well. I find it personally helpful because it means when I'm kind of recording or creating anything, I've got these really beautiful spots that I can stand in, like the one I'm stood in right now is one of my favorite spots in the valley. I love how this looks, so that is why I have a few different spots that you can really make the most of the beauty of what you've created. Now, final tip number 10 is functionality. This kind of links back to being able to make sure you can access everything, but functionality will help you so much in the game, especially if you are early on. Something I find really helpful is to make sure you have a crafting table in every single biome, or at least the majority of biomes. I don't tend to do all of them now, but I will do kind of every other biome will have a crafting table in. This just means that when you are running around and doing quests or doing a star path or just generally collecting resources and doing things, you can access a crafting table at all times. A lot of people like to also include an oven dotted around their valley because it means they can cook food when they run out of energy, which is a great tip. I don't personally do this just because I keep a massive stock of food in my pockets, but if that is something that you struggle with and you're constantly running out of energy, an oven spot can be perfect. You could make like a little outdoor kitchen dining area, would look amazing. Or another way to do this is if you have any empty premium shop items in your biome, inside that premium shop house, build a kitchen, build a diner, build something that has an oven, and you can place that in there, and it means you can literally just run into that house when you're in that biome, cook yourself some more food, and it is a really good way to kind of keep yourself topped up and make sure you're not having to keep going back and forth to your own home or back and forth to Remy's in order to keep your energy high. As well as that, just make sure your biomes are functional for you. It's how you play, and your play style is what is important here, and making sure it works for you is definitely something you've got to think about because it's your valley. You need to make it your own and what works well for you. So those are my top 10 tips of my kind of ways I design in Disney Dreamlight Valley. As I said at the start, these are not a rule book. You can design in any way you want. This is just what I find works for me when I'm creating, and now I've kind of got to the point where I'm really happy with how all of my valley builds look, and I'm starting to do more in Eternity Isle. I am kind of looking at what worked well for me, and these are just my top 10 tips for anyone getting started with designing in Disney Dreamlight Valley. Let me know what you think down below, and if you have any other questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them. Make sure you like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.